How's it going, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar, and with me I have Vivek Tiwary. How are you, sir?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on and talking about this wonderful book. I've been a big fan of this particular book. I've pushed it. Pushing it sounds so negative. I've I've suggested it to my viewers for a few years now. It's one of my
Thank
favorite
you.
graphic novels, and I'm not even the biggest Beatle fan, and I think that's how I sell it. I'm like, you don't have to be. You don't have to be familiar with all their music. You don't have to be familiar with everything that went on in their lives. It's just that good of a story that it will captivate you and make you want to research things on your own.
Thank you.
But yeah, I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then we can start talking about this project and where we can find it again.
Thank you again for having me. I'm Vivek Tiwary, and I run my own company. It's called Tiwary Entertainment Group, and we say that we strive to shift the paradigm for music and entertainment, which is a very pretentious way of saying that we are music lovers who try to find interesting ways of presenting music to the world. Whether that's in graphic novel form, as with the Fifth Beatle, or whether it's in a Broadway show. I was recently producer of Jagged Little Pill, working with Alanis Morissette, or whether
Wow.
it's in film and TV. We describe our work as being music driven, but platform nimble, which means we let music and story lead the way, and then the platform comes afterwards.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what we do. And the Fifth Beatle is a genuine labor of love. So it is always such a pleasure to be able to talk about it. And I really do appreciate you saying that it's not just for Beatles fans, because that was my intention. I am a gigantic Beatles fan. So there is that. But I really believe at the core of the story is an inspiring human story, and that you really don't need to be a Beatles fan or even a music fan to appreciate the story. To use some film references, I don't think you need to be a boxing fan to love Rocky, or a ballet fan to love Billy Elliot. These are stories about underdogs who wanted to make an impact and inspire people and change the world in their chosen fields of passion. And that's what Brian Epstein was and did. He was a gay Jewish 26-year-old kid in 1961 Liverpool, where those elements of his life made him the ultimate outsider. It was a felony to be gay in the UK. Anti-Semitism is still a huge problem today. As we're recording this, there's a war in Israel and between Israel and Hamas, and we're seeing that firsthand. But in the 1960s in Liverpool, it was a way of life for Brian. Anti-Semitic jokes being tossed around every day. And Liverpool before the Beatles is a dirty port town in the north of England where nobody is looking for the next big cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
So in Brian, you've literally got this 26-year-old gay kid saying, I found a local rock and roll band who are going to be bigger than Elvis, who are going to elevate pop music into an art form. And people laughed at him, and they said those dreams are stupid, and people like you don't do things like that. But he chased those dreams with passion and persistence, and in just a handful of years, he gave the world the Beatles. And here we are, decades later, still celebrating those accomplishments and still being inspired by the body of work that he helped to expose to the world. And so that's really the part of the story that's inspiring to me, as much as I am also a huge Beatles fan. And I love when I got into the research on this, what I wanted was the Beatles stories. I wanted to know, how did he get them a record deal when no one wanted to sign them? How did he come up with the idea of the suits and the haircuts? I wanted those business stories. How did he convince Ed Sullivan to book a British band in the United States when a British band had never made an impact over here? That's the reason I got into the study, and I suspect that's the reason most people pick up this book. But what I hope they'll come out with is not just the answer to those Beatles stories, but they'll come out inspired to chase their dreams. because that's what happened to me when I was, when I was doing all this research. I realized, if the gay Jewish kid from Liverpool could bring the world the Beatles, why couldn't a weirdo Indian kid from New York's Lower East Side, child of immigrants, why couldn't I write graphic novels and produce musicals? And if he could elevate pop music into an art form, surely I could shift the paradigm for music and entertainment. so
Um,
so that's what it means to me, and that's kind of why I'm here. So again, thank you for starting this conversation by saying it's not just for Beatles fans, because I think if you're a Beatles fan, it is a particular treat, but it really is for everyone. It's for every human. It's like an inspiring human story. If I've done my job correctly, that's what it is.
but I do love the fact that you compared it to things like Rocky, right? Because yeah, you don't have to love boxing, you don't have to be from Philly to understand the story of an underdog, and I think that's what makes a really good, compelling story is how you can relate to the character. Because you can make it about anything, as long as the characters are likable and you care about the characters. That's what makes you keep reading,
Yeah.
and you were able to do that. I have so many questions, but I also don't want to spoil this book for people that haven't read it or don't even know who Brian Epstein was, or what he was able to do. So I'm going to limit myself. Maybe after we record, I'll ask some couple of questions
Yeah, right
because
on.
some of them have to do with the ending and everything. When you said research, what even got you to that moment? Like, what was it? Was it the idea to always make a graphic novel, or were you just doing like maybe a documentary and it kind of led down this other path of like, there's this really interesting guy that kind of put everything together, and I kind of want to know more about him and less about all the business stuff going on. Like, at what moment did that happen?
Yeah, honestly, it was really none of the above. Like I wasn't doing research for any goal other than being a young person who needed inspiration in his life. And
Wow. Okay.
that is the honest truth. So growing up in New York City, as I mentioned, I was a child of immigrants. My family's originally from India. And, those people who believed in me and what was expected of me to chase was to become a doctor or an engineer, and everyone else thought I would wind up driving a taxi cab or working in a deli. Like that was the spectrum of career opportunities for me. you
Mhm.
know and obviously I aspired to more than driving a taxi cab or running a deli. Not that there's anything wrong with those fields, but I had bigger dreams. And I didn't want to work in finance or engineering or medicine, which are the fields that are expected of Indian kids who have a little promise and are given some opportunity. So I found myself at college. I was in business school because I guess my family decided if I wasn't going to be a doctor or an engineer, then I was going to join the family business, which was in
Okay.
finance and food products. And it's quite diversified, but those are the cores. And also things that I'm not that interested in. And so here I am in college, very close with my family. And so I was really, like a lot of young people, mixed up. I didn't want to let my family down because I loved them
Mhm.
very much. And I was very, very grateful for the opportunities that they gave me. But I also knew that those weren't my passions. And I also didn't want to let myself down. And I wanted to follow my heart. And so I was at the University of Pennsylvania and the Wharton School of Business.
Okay.
And this was in the early 90s. And the Wharton School in the early 90s does not have any resources for a student who wants to pursue a career in the arts and entertainment. That's changed. They now have quite a bit for those aspirations. And I try to get back to the university myself to lecture and be a resource when I can. But in the early 90s, just being very honest, it was all about accounting and finance and investment banking and very traditional business fields. This was even before the internet boom. So they weren't
Oh,
even encouraging people to go into technology or new media. So I had to find inspiration on my own. And I thought, if I want a career in the entertainment industry, and I knew that music was my first love, I wanted to start with music. I thought I should study the great music industry entrepreneurs. And I was a huge Beatles fan. And I believe that the Beatles and their manager, Brian Epstein, wrote and then rewrote the rules of the pop music business. So I thought, okay, I need to study the life of Brian Epstein. I'll find some inspiration there because I'm not getting it in my traditional classes. And that's what led me to a study. And, to this day, there are no books about Brian Epstein in print other than The Fifth Beatle, graphic novel or otherwise. So rewinding to 1991.
And I'll be honest with you, I hate to interrupt, but I had never heard of him. So the title captivated me, like,
Thank you.
And I thought, oh, they must have lost a member early on. He must have been the other drummer, right? Or something like that. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, thank you for saying that. So because it's right, you're right. It was like a mystery. I thought, like, how can you not find information about the guy who managed the Beatles? I remember finding materials from John Lennon's astrologist, and I couldn't find a book about the guy who managed the band. I thought that was crazy.
Wow.
And so, again, this is 91. So not only are there no books about Brian Epstein in print, there's no Wikipedia, there's no YouTube, there's no Google. So
I was about to make that comment earlier. I'm like, when you started that, people don't realize how different things were now. And I don't mean everybody, right? We were there, but there is definitely a whole new generation that has no idea what it wasn't like to go, oh, Brian Epstein.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No idea, right? No idea.
Yeah. So so what I did was I read every Beatles book I could get my hands on. And I'd read these 300-page books about the Beatles that might have 10 or 15 decent pages about Brian Epstein, pages that I now know were either full of half-truths or misinformation. But I got a picture of who the people were that knew him, his friends, his detractors and enemies, his allies, his clients, his family. And I literally pulled a phone book off the shelf. Back in those days, we had phone books. They were like the size of maybe two of those comic omnibuses that I see in the background in your office there. It was a gigantic book. And it was literally just look up last names. And I focused on people who were either in New York or Philadelphia, because I lived in New York and I was at school in Philly, people that I could actually potentially meet with. People like Sid Bernstein, the legendary concert promoter who brought the Beatles over to the US for the first time. Nat Weiss, who was Brian Epstein's, he was initially the Beatles' US attorney, but became Brian's dear friend and closest confidant. And I just cold called these people. Peter Brown had an office in the US. He worked very closely with the Beatles. And literally, I just said, hey, I told the truth. I'm a student at the Wharton School. I am not writing a term paper or anything like that. I just am looking for some inspiration. And the little bit I know about Brian Epstein, I think is inspiring. And I'm studying the business of the arts, and I just want to learn some more. Would you talk to me? And not one of them turned me down.
Wonderful.
The phrase I like to use is I was so excited about reaching out to these folks that I forgot to be intimidated. And they all said yes. And again, by focusing on people who were nearby, I got to meet with them. So it became a series of meetings, and we wound up becoming very friendly. And what happened is they told me the wonderful Beatles stories about the business and how Brian brought the Beatles over to the US when, as I said, a British band had never made an impact over here, how they worked out those deals. I got all these amazing stories. And I was clearly very hungry for Beatles stories and how Brian did this. And then after a while, when these people realized that I was passionate and inquisitive and honest and had no ulterior motive or ill agenda, they said, if you really want to understand how Brian did what he did, you have to understand who he was. And they started to confide in me about his struggles as a gay man, his struggles as a Jewish man, his struggles to push against his family business. They were in furniture, which I could relate to. I didn't want to join my family business. And the fact that he was such an outsider. And, and there are elements of his story that are quite tragic. He dies at the age of 32, never having had a proper boyfriend, having brought so much love into the world through the Beatles music. And I maybe that's a spoiler, but It's not. It's relatively easy knowledge out there, and I think it's the journey that's the important part of the story. But that's what was really inspiring to me, and that is the part that really helped to guide me throughout my career. And then fast forward to about 10 years later, and when I had a career and I was doing quite well in the entertainment industry, I was producing shows successfully on Broadway, and I was trying to think about what's the next story I want to tell. As I said, we're music driven and we care very deeply about story, and we think of platform last. And I realized no one had told the Brian Epstein story. There were still no books in print. And, when I had begun this research, because when Brian was alive, it was a felony to be gay, his friends didn't talk much about that, because it could literally when Brian was around, talking about it could have literally gotten their friend thrown in jail. So they were not used to opening up about that. So it was a real honor that they would tell me about these elements of his life. And, I went back to all of them and I said, as you know, well, when I first reached out to you, I had no agenda. I just wanted to know these stories. But now that I've done well and I have a career and I have some ability and influence in the industry, I do want to tell the story. And would you be okay with that? And they all said, absolutely. The world still has a long way to go, but we are more willing to hear these kind of stories than we were in the early 90s. And they gave me their blessing. They gave me extra interviews and helped to connect me with other people so I could continue my research. And then I was off to the races. And I'm talking to you a lot, but
no, it's okay. What year was that?
When I also decided that comics were the place I wanted to start. And,
okay.
And that's what I started doing. So I'm going to shut up now. But
I did have to kind of put a timeline with this. What year? Do you remember the year or around the time when you decided to continue moving forward and then going into the realm of comics?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, it would have been. I mean, people say how long you've been working on the Fifth Beatle, and I'm almost like, more than half my life, because it's hard to know when the clock started ticking, right?
If it's 1991,
in the early 90s when I started this research, but like it must have been, coming. I mean, the book is celebrating its 10-year anniversary. That's why we're having this chat. Is the 10-year anniversary edition's coming out on November 21st, and we were probably working on the graphic novel for almost a decade before that. And I was probably starting my research a few years before that, so we are probably looking at like, I don't know, 2010 maybe early 2000s, right? Probably about a decade after I started, my research as a college student. Probably it was a few years as I was out of college. Yeah, probably 2000, 99, 2000, something like that.
Don't take this the wrong way, but that's insane. And I mean that in the nicest positive way, because that is truly the definition of a love project. Like this is something that you've been working on, that you want to make sure you get everything right. Cross your T's, dot your I's, whatever. But my gosh, that's amazing. Okay. So then
here's the thing. Like, as I said, for me, it's about finding inspiration that has helped to guide my life. And so it never really, well, I shouldn't say never. It almost never felt like work. Like all of this stuff was it was cool. It was fun.
Right, because it's a passion project, right? Like you want to keep letting people know about Brian. So
and it still goes on. Like as the world opens up and as things like the Fifth Beatle get published and 10-year anniversary, it's doing really well. Like, I to this day, like, will still get phone calls out of the blue or a letter from somebody who's like, I knew Brian and I wanted to tell you something that you may not have known. Or, I mean, literally, I got a message from somebody who said, before, when Brian was young, before he was understood his sexuality, my mom dated, went on a date with him. And she's still alive. And if you'd like to talk to her, she'd be happy to share her recollections. I mean, like, amazing stuff like that. Amazing stuff like that. It's like, so the research never ends. It's really a beautiful thing.
And I think that's wonderful that people are still reaching out to you and they found out through this graphic novel. This is why I love, obviously, the graphic novel medium. Comics has always been my thing. So, what about you though? Like, when did you this? Were you a comics fan?
Oh yeah.
Uh, okay, so let's talk a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about the process of getting like Andrew on board, and then the
Yeah.
whole team. So you grew up. Did you read comics, or did you like? At what point did comics enter your life?
Oh, I mean, I comics have been in my life since as long as I can, literally as long as I can remember. You know, and
Awesome.
I often say that I learned. I'm pretty sure I learned to read by reading comics. My
Yeah, I get it.
earliest memories of reading are reading Tintin and Asterix with my mom. I mean, that's
Oh,
literally my earliest memories of reading. So it all for me, it all starts with comics,
mhm.
and comics to me have been my best friends. I'm an only child. My confidants. Like
I get that.
I've
I
said
get
it
that.
before, but I think I learned about sacrifice from Chris Claremont's Dark Phoenix arc. I learned about brotherhood from the original Eastman and Laird Mirage Studios run of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I learned about hope and dreams from the Sandman. I mean, it's
But
like from
this
the old.
conversation just
I
got a
mean, like
lot better.
these were my heroes. These people
Right.
were my heroes when I was growing up. Was the comic creators, you
So
know?
when you decided to take your passion and this, these stories you've been learning about Brian, when you decided maybe I'm gonna let other people know, it was always comics, like, or was it ever like, oh, maybe I'll make a documentary or write a book, like, or was it
Yeah,
always visually like what you saw was a graphic novel?
yeah. I mean, it's funny because I had when I started the work part of this, so to
Mhm.
speak, when I decided I want to tell Brian's story, that probably in some ways the easiest, smartest, whatever you want to call it, thing to do would have been to have made a musical because that's what I had been successful and known
Yeah.
for at the time was my work on Broadway. But when I decided, as I say, I always think music comes first. So here it's obviously the Beatles.
Mhm.
Story is a very close second. So this is the Brian Epstein story. So I'm like, how do I want to? And then we figure out where it belongs, right? So I think, what is the story? How do I want to tell the story? And the way I looked at it was, I wanted to focus on the years he spends with the Beatles. Hence, it's called the Fifth Beatle. So we're looking at 1961 to 1967, more or less.
Mhm.
1961 story starts in Liverpool. It's dark, it's gray, it's drab, it's a little depressing, it's very black and white, is the way I looked at it.
Okay.
And the story ends in 1967 London, which is bright, it's colorful. We're on the eve of the summer of love. It's the dawn of the psychedelic days. There's literally an event in the UK called A Technicolor Dream. So, in my mind, the Beatles injected color into Brian Epstein's life. And together, Brian and the Beatles gave color to a very black and white world. That might sound awfully cheesy and poetic, but that's how
No.
I thought about it in the early days. And I thought that the two media that most powerfully use color as a narrative tool are comics and film, and that means the filmed art could be film, TV, but film. And
Mhm.
so, really, from the very, very beginning, I wanted to do both. I wanted to do a graphic novel and I wanted to do a film. And because I was a lifelong comics fan, doing a comic was always a dream. And with comics, the team is smaller. It's really the writer and the artist, and together the two of you are director, costume designer, production designer. You're kind of everyone. So
Yeah.
so I'm looking back on it. I'm not sure this logic was accurate, but I thought let me do a graphic novel first because that might be easier. Because it was hard and it took a lot of work. And Andrew Robinson painted every single page of this book. So I think he was painting for 4 years. I mean, it was crazy. So it was not easy. But at the beginning, I thought, let me start there. But also from the very beginning, we said, let's also plan on doing a film one day, and that's still something we're planning on doing. But if you look at the graphic novel, I mean, I'll say, we did that. It's not totally black and white, but the first pages are black, white, and blue. It's you can sort of see it's
Yeah.
really it's that, and then you get to the end of the book, and you've got pages that are cartoony and full on Technicolor like Kyle Baker's work. So we did that. We really leaned into that idea of
Mhm.
starting with low color and then injecting color. You know, when the Beatles first appear at the Cavern Club, and this is comics, this is the magic of comics. You know, on those pages, all of a sudden you get your first reds and oranges, and then as I showed you, by the end of the book, we're in full color.
Yeah.
So to me, comics was always the place to start. But you know, I want to tell the story. I want to shout it from the rooftops. I think everybody should know, the way that virtually everybody knows who the Beatles are. I think everybody should know who Brian is, and that's because I think he can inspire people to chase their dreams. So the story keeps getting told, and that's why I'm so thrilled that we're celebrating a 10-year anniversary and putting out a new edition of the book.
So tell me a little bit about that. Like when you all first got started, how did you and Andrew and then Kyle, like, how did all that come about? Did you, because you had never written a graphic novel, right? Like, this is your first graphic novel. You liked comics. You were working in the music industry and doing musicals. How in the world did that, like, did you just know people? Like, because I'm always curious. These are my favorite kinds.
I mean, you know,
how it all comes together.
Look, it was a mixture of knowing people, but also like the comics industry, as any fan will tell you, it's a pretty open world. I mean, like, if you've ever been to a Comic-Con and walked around Artist Alley, like, if you're willing to wait on a line, it's not hard to meet your heroes. You know, these people, more often than not, they have booths or they're doing panels, and you can just walk up to them afterwards and say, "Hey, I'm a huge fan," you know, and just strike up a conversation.
Gotcha.
So yes, I knew some people because the entertainment industry is a small world. So I did know people at publishing companies and who were connected to artists in a more formal capacity, agents, literary agents. I did know those people. That's true. But really, more importantly, I knew comics because I was a fan, and I knew artists. You know, I knew Andrew. I didn't know Andrew personally, but I knew his work, and I knew that he did these gorgeous sort of photorealistic, but still kind of stylized and occasionally surreal type of artwork, which I thought would be perfect for this. I also knew that he'd done a lot of superhero work, and I had not seen him do any sort of real world historical work. And I thought there's a good chance he might be excited about working on something that was Beatles related. Obviously, that always pricks people's ears because it's the Beatles. Yeah. But also maybe it would give him a chance to do something outside of the world of superheroes. And sure enough, and literally, I just networked to him through the comics industry and managed to get a meeting with him. And sure enough, he was a huge Beatles fan and did really love the idea of working on something that was different from the ordinary work that he would, not ordinary, but like the stellar work that he was doing, but it was very different. And so he agreed to do the book when he was, you know, for far less than his normal rates or his normal availability. And Kyle was actually somebody I knew a little bit. We'd cross paths because Kyle's a New Yorker, and he would, like myself, and also a person of color, and we moved in certain circles, and we were outsiders in much the same kinds of ways. We had never worked together, but we knew each other. He's a little bit older than me, and I just had a feeling he probably grew up loving the Beatles and loving the Beatles cartoons, not the Yellow Submarine cartoon, but the ones were on television.
Yeah, I remember those.
On the book is a very specific sequence. Andrew paints most of the book, but Kyle does almost like an insert that's an homage to those cartoons. And again, I had a feeling that Kyle, he's a brilliant cartoonist, and I thought he probably grew up with those cartoons, and I was right, and so he signed on as well. So that's, I mean, really, it was passion and a little bit of networking, but it was really organic. It was really organic.
Oh, that's one of my favorite things to learn about is how a group comes together. And, you know, sometimes it's a really cool story. Like, you were networking at comic shows, and you're right. It is. People are really approachable. Most comic creators, and then sometimes, you know, the publishers themselves put this together. So then my question is, you're now being published at Dark Horse. That's going to be the 10th anniversary of this wonderful book. It's in the same dimensions that the original one came out. So Did you self-publish or did you go through, I think it was it M Press, I think is who did was it the original printing?
Yeah, no, Empress is actually just a division of Dark Horse, so
Oh, okay.
it was always been Dark Horse.
Wow.
In those early days when Andrew and I were putting it together, even before Kyle came on board, uh,
Mhm.
and actually, let me take one quick second to just give a shout out to Mark Irwin, he's an independent editor and a colorist and does a lot of amazing things in the comic industry.
Okay.
He was very instrumental in connecting me to Andrew, because Andrew was a busy guy and I met Mark through a mutual friend, and Mark was like, "Let me help you put this book together." So
Mhm.
I do feel like Mark should be honored on this 10-year anniversary edition, certainly in the story of how it came together. But yeah, in those early days, it was me and Andrew, and Mark was advising us, and I knew that there was no world in which we wanted to self-publish. But in all the work that I've done, and certainly how you produce musicals, Broadway musicals, there aren't Broadway studios the way that there are film studios that put out a whole slew of films. Every time you do a Broadway musical, it's kind of like its own little business unit. You raise the money, you put on the show, you secure the theater, you do all the work, right? So that's kind of what I was used to doing. I was like, I'm not going to wait around for a publisher to tell me you've got a good book on your hands, here's some money, go out and do it. I said, I'm going to raise the money and I'm going to do it myself. And again, we never intended to self-publish, but we figured we would make the book and then take a completed book around to publishers at that point. So we would control it. We would create exactly the piece we wanted to create.
Okay.
We knew that it would be beautiful, or we had faith in ourselves, and then we were going to take it around. And what ended up happening was, because it's Beatles related, and that always, garners attention and buzz. While I had not worked in comics, I had had a lot of successes, particularly in Broadway, but in show business, if you will. So
Mhm.
I had a name that some people had heard of. And certainly Andrew Robinson and Kyle Baker were big names in the comic industry. So when word got out that, there's a Beatles book coming that Andrew Robinson and Kyle Baker are painting, and while I wasn't a famous comic writer, it's been written by this guy, Vivek Tiwary, who's done interesting work in the entertainment industry. And I think also, it being that a name like Vivek Tiwary, you could probably guess that that's a person of color, and that's kind of unusual. Why is that guy wanting to tell this story?
Mhm.
Publishers started calling. They were curious. And it would be a bit extreme to say there was a bidding war. That might be a bit of a melodramatic way of putting it, but there kind of was. There was all
It's a good thing to have.
my favorite companies wanted to put out this book. They were all great, but I will say Mike Richardson, who's the publisher and founder of Dark Horse,
Mhm.
huge Beatles fan. He was very passionate about this, and that was the home we landed on. So it's always been Dark Horse, but we had started making the book, and they came on, like, not halfway, but maybe a quarter way, or about a quarter way through the process. Dark Horse came on board. So, and here we are 10 years later. We were bumping up on the 10-year anniversary of the book. And, I had a conversation with Mike Richardson again, and we agreed, let's do something special. The book has very gratefully proven to be what they call in the publishing industry an evergreen, meaning people always want to pick it up or are learning about it. So it has proven to have staying power, I guess, if you will. For lack of another way of saying it. And so we thought, let's do something special. And I being a longtime comic fan, I'm always, I'll admit, a little wary about special editions and anniversary editions, because I often find it's like, I'm a collector myself, and I often find, like, they're just making collectors like me spend more money for something that isn't really any different. I already have this book, but yes, I of course want the new version, so I'm going to buy it. So we didn't want to do that. The book was consistently selling. We didn't feel we needed to slap a new cover on it to, like, increase sales. We wanted to really celebrate the anniversary and give people something new. If you're a longtime fan, we wanted to add material that you would care about. And I hope that we have done that, because there is a lot of new stuff in it. I mean, yes, there is a gorgeous new cover. by Chris Brunner and Rico Renzi, who were handpicked by Andrew Robinson when we were talking about wanting a fresh look that could also pay homage to the old cover and to Andrew's work and to Kyle's work. Andrew suggested Chris and Rico, and I think they did that. You'll see that it's got black and white, but a little bit of color. And I think it's photorealistic, but cartoony. I think it really encapsulates all those things we talked about. So yes, it has a nice new cover, but inside the book, the thing that I'm most excited about is we've included a soundtrack, what I call a playlist. And this is so cheesy to say this, but like, this is the version of the book that I had always intended people to hear. I feel like creators always say that when they get a director's cut or whatever, but it's true. This is a music book, and Andrew and Kyle will tell you my early scripts had music cues, even though the book couldn't sing per se. I said, hear the music that I'm hearing in my head. And what we've literally done now is there's a QR code at the beginning of the book that you can scan and get to Spotify or your digital service provider. And if you don't have a digital service provider, we've also listed the tracks below, so you can put together a playlist on your own if you need to, but you can just scan it and listen along. And I've included what I call liner notes, which explain why I chose these songs and what pages of the book you should listen to the song while reading.
I love that, by the way.
Thanks.
Because that to me is like some of my favorite extras that people put in the books. I think
well, I'm very excited to share this with the world.
Like Jeff Lemire did that before with a playlist. I love when writers put a playlist like of music during certain issues or during just a whole graphic novel. I think that's really cool. It adds definitely that flair of, oh, this is nice. This is like getting a little behind the scenes as to what's going on in the creator's head as he is imagining. Because, music, well, hell, I don't have to tell you this. That like music is like tells you a story, right? Yeah. Well, who am I talking to? Never mind. Forget I just said that.
No, absolutely.
But I think it adds definitely things and makes the stories almost more memorable in your head. If you like, I love listening to different tracks while I'm reading. I to this day, ever since I was a kid, I like listening to music. And some records, some albums will always remind me of like a certain comic story, like an event or something like that. Because in my head, I have the two just so intertwined that I can't separate them anymore. So I love when writers do that. Like, here's a playlist. These are all. So that's a nice touch. That's awesome.
Thank you, brother. And, and I don't want to spoil it, but I will say part of why I'm really excited about this is I think most people would understandably expect it to be Beatles songs and music from the era. And obviously there is a good bit of that, but it's not just Beatles songs. And it's also not just songs from the 1960s. There's a Bauhaus song. There's a Stone Roses song. There's a song by the Brazilian electronic composer Amon Tobin. It's kind of I think it'll be quite unexpected, the playlist, but it's what we were hearing in our heads. So I hope that people will enjoy that. Yeah, so it's got that. It's got and there's some other really cool stuff. It has a new introduction by Kelly Curtis, who was Pearl Jam's longtime manager.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
Story. Kelly also pushed the boundaries of the music industry. Pearl Jam did also, they fought against ticketing, and they allowed fans to record their concerts and put out CDs around that. They did they really blazed many trails in the music industry. And Kelly was always kind of a hero of mine, and I had the good fortune of meeting him. And sure enough, Brian Epstein was a huge hero of his. So it's been really cool to get somebody like Kelly to do an introduction and explain what Brian meant to him. So that's really cool. There's expanded sketchbooks at the back of the book. So the artists get to have a deeper say. I'm really proud of it. And I can only hope that longtime fans will feel like I'm not just sucking their money for another collectible, but will feel like there's some new stuff in there. So
it has been 10 years, to be fair, and it's a good reminder that, hey, there's this wonderful book out here and people should check it out. So I think that's that I don't mind when published. And let me tell you something. As a collector myself, I'm also a sucker for little extra things. Like, you have no idea how many times I've more than triple dipped on a certain story or movie
Oh,
because
I
they
do the
add
same thing.
something extra.
Oh, yeah.
Something so silly as like like an extra page of story, right? Like,
Yeah.
who in their right mind does that? But collectors have a different mentality than most
Yes, we
people do.
do.
Most
Yes, we
people
do.
do. Like an extra track on a record or a brand new cover on a vinyl. All these different things that, people have done. They've managed to understand the mentality of a collector and how we work. You add 10th anniversary. Yeah, okay, sure. There'll be a 15th anniversary, and maybe the 15th anniversary will have something a little bit extra, and people are like, yeah, I'll get that again. I really like that story. Like, my wife's the same way. My wife loves like Edward Scissorhands and like Tim
Nice.
Burton movies. And every 5 years, there's a different type of collection that adds really nothing. But she's like, "Well, I gotta get it. I mean, it's the latest edition. Surely it's been remastered."
I do
um,
the same thing. I do the
so
same
I
thing.
I get that, and I think a lot of my viewers that come to my channel and watch completely understand that we are all that type of creature that are okay with putting something
Yeah.
up, like a 10th anniversary. So with this 10th anniversary coming out, I do have to ask the question, because after I read this, I was like, two things happened. I had never heard of Brian Epstein, and I had never heard of Vivek. And I'm like, well, I wonder what else this guy has written, right? Like his first comics, and I did some background check, and I'm like, oh, okay, not much since then, but he's done all these other things, like you're a busy guy.
Yeah.
Uh,
Thanks.
has there ever been an interest to go back to the world of graphic novels? Do you have other ideas? Do you have any other research that you started in 1991 about a certain manager for a group, or anything else? It doesn't have to be about music, but I know that's what you enjoy too.
Yeah, I love comics and I loved writing this. And I would love to work in comics again. To be honest, it took a really long time to get this book out.
Well,
And
yeah.
as much as it was a joy, it was also very emotional. And I since then have just been really focusing on sort of our other projects. I do have dreams for other graphic novel stories, and I have always been inspired by the managers. At one point, I wanted to do a graphic novel about Colonel Parker, about Elvis's
Oh,
manager.
this is manager. Okay, yeah, I
Um,
know that guy.
and he has a bit of a guest appearance in this book. Um,
Yes, yes.
and I think that Baz Luhrmann and his recent Elvis film really kind of did what I wanted to do with Colonel Parker,
Mhm.
and 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 it's really sort of joyous and full circle there as well, where Baz actually on the back of the book of this 10th anniversary edition, you'll see a lovely quote and endorsement from Baz Luhrmann, I got a call from his team and telling me that the Fifth Beatle was an inspiration to him when they were making Elvis. The Colonel Parker sequence, which I don't want to give away too much, but you'll see that Andrew draws him much like a vampire. And for those comic nerds out there, I will say that in my script I said, I want it to be a little bit like 30 Days of Night in that sequence, like
Yeah,
those kind of Templeton vampires.
yeah.
Um, uh, so um, so that's what Andrew did there. And there's literally a line in the Elvis film, in Boz's Elvis film, that Elvis never said in the parking lot. He's yelling at Parker and he says, "You're just like a damn vampire trying to suck the blood out of me." And it's actually a subtle nod to the Fifth Beatle, which to me is like so amazing to think about that. and all of that is a way of saying that, like, that film is so wonderful. Baz Luhrmann is such a great creator that, like, I initially thought about doing an Elvis graphic novel, but I'm like, that story's been told the way it needs to be told, and so I don't need to do that one anymore. So I don't know. I don't know what my next one is. Like, I definitely will do another one because as I said, I love comics,
Mhm.
but quite frankly, I'm not sure what that next one's going to be yet.
I think when you write something like this, you mentioned something earlier, that not everybody really thinks about until you get there. When you write something like this, and it is a passion project, and it did get critically acclaimed, like it got awards, and rightly so. And I haven't met anybody that I have suggested this book to. I mean, it's been nothing but like, thank you, Omar, for letting me know about this book. I had no idea it was a thing, and I was a Beatles fan, or I've never even listened to any Beatles songs. Whatever it is, it always comes back with positive, like, this was such a wonderful read. Once you do that, it's so I find it so difficult to just, where do you go from there? Like, right? Like,
Yeah.
not that writing your first graphic novel should be crap, and then you can only go up from there, but writing a graphic novel for the first time with all that research, with everything, you putting your love, heart, and everything into this, and to see that kind, to be received that way, I think it definitely puts you on it's a little stressful, right? It's like, oh, this was good, and now probably I have expectations from people that are like, when's the next thing? I think authors go through that too. Like, whenever they write something huge, they're like, oh, what do I do after this particular book that did so well?
Yeah, it's but it's funny. The reason that I don't put that too much of that kind of pressure on myself, and I hope that people who are fans of my work don't feel that they've been neglected, is because, kind of as we were saying at the beginning of this chat, the way that I view what I do is like, I'm music focused, and I'm
Uh-huh.
story driven, and I'm ultimately a storyteller. And the medium kind of doesn't matter. And yeah, of course I love comics, as I said, and I want to do that again. But while it's true I haven't written another graphic novel in the past 10 years, while we're celebrating this 10-year anniversary edition,
Mhm.
I have worked with Alanis Morissette and produced Jagged Little Pill on Broadway, and I was a producer on Green Day's American Idiot, and
That's so
done
freaking
other
awesome.
work that in my mind is similar. It's like great music telling a really
Yep.
inspiring story. And to me, that's not different. I mean, it's yes, it's literally technically different medium, but to me, it's the same thing. It's
Mhm.
music, storytelling, and seeking inspiration. So I really feel like I'm just continuing to do what I've always done. Is focus on music projects, tell great stories, deliver great experiences to my fans and supporters, and then whatever medium that takes, that's secondary. If that's a comic book, if it's a stage musical, if it's a film or a TV show, that's the least important thing. The most important thing is getting the music and the story right.
Well said. Now I have two more things to talk about before I can let you go.
Okay.
Uh, Number one, as a child of, I myself am an immigrant, and um, explaining to my mom and dad what I do for a living, which is YouTube, right? This is what I do, and I talk about graphic novels. I am very blessed to be doing that. Like, to them, it doesn't matter. They're so supportive. Like, my mom will watch my videos no matter what, and she'll share it with her family in Peru. Um, my dad is so confused. Like, my mom gets YouTube a little bit. My dad's like, you put this is on television, and I'm like, well, sort of. And he was like the
Exactly.
news, and are you giving people financial advice? And I'm like, no, 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 dad. Like, so I have to ask you, when you were telling your parents, like, because you have you mentioned expectations, right?
Yeah.
What how how do they react to everything you've done, right? Like, from the beginning to where you are now, like, how is that?
It's been hard, but for slightly different reasons, because my parents passed away, unfortunately, when I was
Oh,
quite young.
I am
So
so sorry.
they got to see me do the seeds of what I'm doing now.
Mhm.
My dad died while I was still in college. So he really did not get to see me do this kind of work, although he saw the research I'd started doing. He saw where my passions were lying. And he was a doctor, and he saw that I was not going to be a doctor like him. And he saw that I was not going to join my family business. So I think he could tell I was going to pursue my own dreams. And he was actually quite supportive of that. I have to give my parents their due. They were nervous but supportive.
Mhm.
And now that I'm a dad myself, I get the nervousness. I mean, these are
Oh,
difficult fields.
yeah.
Now that I'm a dad myself, like if my kid wants to be a doctor or an engineer or go into finance, like good on them. Like those are lucrative, stable fields. Like producing musicals and writing comic books are not stable fields. I hope I'll be the kind of dad that will encourage them to pursue their dreams. But it's a way of saying that like my parents made me ask myself tough questions. They were like, we can't help you. We don't know these fields. But if that's what you want to do, take it seriously. My mom wanted to know. I played drums and percussion in high school and college, and I was in bands. And I think as I was pursuing a career in the music industry, my
Mhm.
mom wanted to know, like, is this just like you goofing around in your bands? Because I was never that good and we were never serious in our bands. Or are you
Mhm.
taking it seriously? Is this going to be a real business? And those were good questions for me to ask myself. So again, she saw it coming, but unfortunately, she also passed away shortly after I graduated. I was working at Mercury Records, so she did get to see me work for a record label, and she knew that my dream was to start my own company. We talked about that. And the honest truth is, not to go down a rabbit hole here, but I started my company with the life insurance money that I got after my mom passed. So I often say that, like, not to be morbid, but like my mother's blood is like literally baked into the DNA of what I do professionally, because I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't have that life insurance money to start my company with. Obviously, I would have preferred to have had my mother here with me, but
Yeah, of course.
anyway, all of that is a long-winded way of saying that my parents were actually quite supportive of the launching pad moments in my career, and so I like to think that wherever they are, that they are seeing what I'm doing and with pride, because there's no question that I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't for them. They loved the arts. They exposed me to the arts when I was a kid. They were supportive at key parts of my life, and and literally they provided the financing unwittingly. So here I am. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry about losing your parents at a young age like that. I, in it's definitely come almost like full circle though, like them supporting you in a way that, like you said, you would rather have your mom than there. But I think it ended up great for you though, how with their support and everything going on, you are where you are, and we're having this conversation about a 10th anniversary, about a passion project that not a lot of people, people are passionate about different things, and not a lot of people get a chance to share that passion with the world. So I think it's wonderful and beautiful. Uh, so yeah,
Thank you so much.
abs- absolutely. Now, the last thing I wanted to say before I let you go, because I know you're a super busy guy, and I want to thank you
No,
again
it's
for your
cool. I
time.
love it. It's the best part of my day.
And a big thank you to all the folks at Dark Horse, like uh, Caitlin, who helped put this together, and Mason too. Do you have any words of advice to anybody that is trying to write their own graphic novel, pursue their dream?
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of writing your own graphic novel, I would just say my advice is to dive in and do it. Don't wait around, don't pitch it. Just go ahead and start, with whatever you've got. If you can write and also draw, then just dive in and do it yourself. If you can write but you're not an artist, then do what I did. Like, start writing script and go to Comic Cons and walk around Artist Alley and introduce yourself to people and show them your scripts and just do a little networking, and you'll eventually find a partner, or maybe you have a friend who's an artist. Just put a team together and then just go ahead and do it. And especially today, there are so many resources where you could self-publish or do a web comic, or there's so many ways of getting independent material out into the world. So I would say don't wait around to like network to a publisher and then pitch your work to a publisher and hope that you'll get signed and get an advance. Just figure it out, find a way to do it yourself, which doesn't mean eventually also do what I did. If you don't want to be a self-publisher, eventually you'll get to a publisher, but don't wait. Just dive in and do it. Read lots of other comics. Read comic scripts. There's a lot of anniversary editions of other books. We didn't do this with ours that have script pages so that you can get familiar with what a comic script looks like. The Scott McCloud books, Understanding Comics and Making Comics, are critical reads for anyone who wants to write their own graphic novel, teaching you about the medium. And then going all the way back, a little more academic, Will Eisner's Comics and Sequential Arts is a fantastic book to understand how to write comics. So read those books, read the Eisner books and the McCloud books, and then dive in, find yourself a team and just do it. That really is my advice. It's the easiest thing in the world to start. It's one of the hardest things in the world to finish. You have to be ready to spend a lot of time and go through an emotional journey. But the starting part, that part's actually not that hard. So that's my advice about making a comic. About chasing your dream, it's kind of the same thing. It's just figure out what your dream is. And I always say that the message of the Brian Epstein story is that no dream is too impossible and no person too unlikely to realize that dream, because Brian was the ultimate outsider. So I'll say it one more time. No dream is too impossible and no person too unlikely to realize that dream. And I really believe that. I would say if your dream is unusual or particularly difficult, if you're a woman and you have a dream of doing something in a field where women traditionally aren't given the same kind of access, or you want to get into politics and you don't have any connections, whatever it is that you want to do, you might have to work a lot harder. I think there probably is how unusual or unorthodox or difficult your dream is to how hard you have to work to get there. But I really do believe if you're going to put in the passion and the work, anybody can realize any dream. And I would also say, pulling it back to Brian Epstein, you could also do what I did. I describe Brian as my historical mentor. He died in 1967 and I was born in 1973. So I never met him, as we were discussing earlier, but I did a lot of research and I learned from his life. And I always say that he was a mentor to me, even though he wasn't alive. I've studied his life, both what to do and what not to do. He was a flawed hero. I think he was heroic, but he had flaws, and I've learned from his flaws too. All great mentors, I think, teach their mentees, their students, both what to do and what not to do. And I say, do that. Find yourself a historical mentor. If you're in a geographic location, or you have in a network where you can't actually find a living, breathing mentor, obviously those are better. But if you can't find somebody, if you can't find a teacher or an actual mentor, go to the history books. And now that there is a Wikipedia and a YouTube and a Google, it's so easier to start. But dig deep, because if there was a Wikipedia and a YouTube and a Google when I'd started the Brian Epstein work, I would have learned the basics. I would have gotten the Beatles stories, and then I would have probably been done and I would have moved on. But because I had to dig deep and talk to these people who knew him, they revealed a side of the research I wasn't expecting, the human story. So find a historical mentor. Study the life of Abraham Lincoln if you want to get into politics. He ran for president twice and was rejected and told, "You're crazy. The dreams are stupid. You'll never get elected." As a person of color, I'm glad he persisted and became and got elected president. Amelia Earhart was literally told women can't fly, literally can't fly. She proved them all wrong. Study the life of Amelia Earhart. If study the lives of Abraham Lincoln, go back to the history books, dig deep, learn what made these people tick. Find yourself a historical mentor and just chase your dreams. That's my advice.
That's some great advice. And my wife would agree about Abraham Lincoln. That's one of her favorite stories that she shares with, she's a teacher, that she shares with her students, that, no matter what, you can keep getting told no, but eventually things will happen. I want to thank you again, Vivek Tiwary, for joining me today to talk about The Fifth Beatle, which is a phenomenal book. The book is coming out from Dark Horse Comics again, the 10th anniversary on November 21st. And yeah, anytime you want to come back on, You're
Oh,
especially when we talk about Green Day. You want to talk about Green Day? We talk about Green Day all day long,
oh
man.
my gosh, yeah,
Dude,
yeah. Thank
I
you.
love that band. But thank you so much for being here, and thank you to all the folks at Dark Horse for helping put this together.
Thank you for having me. And if anybody wants to stay in touch, I am on social media. You can find me on Twitter, which I guess is now called X, at Vivek J Tiwary. I'm also on Facebook, and the Fifth Beatle. We are on both Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And there's a lot of exciting things coming down the line for the Fifth Beatle as well. So please stay in touch. Please follow me personally or follow the Fifth Beatle. And thank you so much for wanting to chat. And thanks everybody for listening.
It's at my absolute pleasure. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for watching.
Thanks so much.